Today, we're going to be taking a look at St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, Russia, and we're going to be looking at the art of this cathedral. It is a building that was built in 1555 to 1561. So it took them 6 years to build it. It's shaped like the fire, like a bonfire rising into the sky. It was built by two architects who designed it, and it has a lot of really beautiful colors and designs, as you can see. It was built by two architects, Barma and Postnik Yakovlev. Now, you might say, gosh, that's really hard to say, and you would be right. The bright colors were always envisioned as part of this um, design, but they weren't added right away. Because back in the 1500s, they didn't have that many paint colors that were easily put on to buildings. But it was always kind of envisioned that way because the religious text that it was referencing, golden crowns and rainbow bright hues. So it was always kind of their idea. Um, Now this building is a museum. It kind of looks familiar though. If you think about other buildings, has anyone ever been to the Corn Palace in South Dakota? Mitchell in South Dakota? There are some similarities, and this references the domes that are part of um, this design. So they have what we call onion domes, which is kind of neat. Um, so not a radish or a turnip, but onions. That's what these um, shapes are, which is kind of cool. Let me tell you a little bit about this artwork, this cathedral, this building. Um, it's in Russia, so Russia is a big country right here. Russia is so big, it actually the sun can rise on this part of Russia and be setting on that side of Russia at the same time, which is kind of crazy. Geographically, Russia is part of Asia. So when we're talking about Asia, we're talking about this whole big chunk of land right here on this continent. But culturally, Russia is more similar to Europe. So we generally consider Russia, even though it is part of Asia geographically, we usually, when we're talking about cultures, Russia is part of the culture that we would consider to be Western culture or European cultures. One of the reasons that Russia is so big is that they had a lot of rulers that conquered a lot of land. Um, and one of those rulers was the guy who commissioned Barma and Postnik, our architects, to make our beautiful cathedral. So this guy, his name is Ivan the Terrible, and he's the guy who said, let's make a beautiful cathedral because I've just conquered some land and I want you to celebrate it with a beautiful building. And he hired these architects and to build this building. But his name was Ivan the Terrible. He was kind of a crazy guy. He, when he was young, he was all about making Russia better for the Russians. But when he got older, he was actually known for fits of rage and being really paranoid, not really sure what's going on. He even one time, when he was so mad, he accidentally killed his own son. That's how kind of out of control he was. Um, but he beat he commissioned Barma and Postnik to create the building to celebrate his conquering of a city, and they designed it in a way that was totally unique to Russia, but might have been inspired by things in the Middle East or in Asia. So we think that Barma and Postnik those architects might have traveled. You guys ever seen a building like these before anywhere else that you might have be able to recognize um, besides Mitchell. But the original was probably more inspired by uh, something that they might have seen in the Middle East. So if you guys have ever seen Aladdin, the Sultan's palace in Aladdin has a lot of the same inspirational pieces, which is kind of fun. Um, but Ivan the Terrible had St. Basil's Cathedral constructed in Moscow, and there is a false legend. So it's not true, but people like to say that because Ivan was so terrible, he actually had the architects blinded when they were done making this beautiful building so that they could never make anything beautiful again. But that is a legend. It's not true. The reality is that the architects did go on to make other architecture while they were still alive. So we know that, but we know that this is still very, very beautiful building. There's a lot of really cool details here, and it's all about texture. All those swirling, swishing lines. There's all sorts of really cool, um, fun little curves. All of this is great. So we are going to be creating our own versions of our own uh, towers that have these onion domes, which is what we call these, and are filled with textures of your own design. So this is what it looks like in the city of Moscow. It's now a museum that people can go and visit, but they do sometimes still have um, religious ceremonies there, maybe just a couple times a year. But mostly it's a museum, and it's just so bright and beautiful. So we're going to learn how do we make our own towers.